This is the first of a planned series of talks on God, science, and atheism. I want to bring some new perspectives on the great God question. Does God exist or not? Is the universe created by a divine being, the divine being? Or is it all simply imagination and there is nothing but matter? And you may think, oh no, not again. I mean, so many of these discussions, especially earlier in this century, there was the new atheism, anti-theism, which was bashing away at religion. And it seemed like they had it all worked out and religion was going to be bashed into obscurity. But religion continues. Stalemate. Atheism goes on, religion goes on. Why discuss anymore? It's the same old arguments. One reason is that the religious case is making a comeback, especially through the personage of one Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, that's spelled M-E-Y-E-R, who has come into prominence. He's written several books. Return of the God Hypothesis, 3 scientific discoveries that reveal the mind behind the universe, is his latest book, and it's getting him traction on talk shows, YouTube. He maintains that, unlike the idea that science and religion, they're two distinct categories. Science tells us about this world and religion tells us about ethics and the supernatural. And instead of saying that these are two distinct fields, he wants to show through science that there is an intelligent mind behind the universe. This is intelligent design theory, but he demonstrates with evidence from physics, cosmology, biology. He's saying that it all together, if you take it all together, it gives the best explanation for the universe as we see it today through the scientific lens, that there is a designing intelligence. God. After publishing that book, he also brought into play the position that there is an unreasonable applicability of mathematics to the observable world. Why are the laws of nature coined in the language of mathematics? Why do the laws of nature conform to mathematics? That also seems to indicate an underlying intelligence. So this Stephen Meyer, among others, but he has become prominent in promoting ID, intelligent design, the case that the universe has come into being by God, who is the supreme intelligence and deliberately designed it. Now, I'm not just going to speak what Stephen Meyer said, and I'm not in exactly the same position as him, but I just want to bring to the attention that it's not a dead issue. It's not that all the discussions are over. He's bringing new life to this discussion. I want to explain why I am not an atheist. That's a parody of Bertrand Russell, a famous philosopher and atheist of the 20th century, who wrote a book with the straight-to-the-point, provocative title, Why I Am Not a Christian. Why I am not an atheist. What's special about me? There's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about anyone intrinsically, atheist or theist. We're all tiny little beings in a huge universe. So why am I taking it upon myself to give this series of talks? Well, one reason is that I've investigated and thought through these issues to some extent. There's no end to it. And some people are interested to hear what I have to share. I have my YouTube following, Facebook following. Obviously for me, it's not a case of armchair philosophy. I've committed my whole life to the particular position that there is God and life is meant for understanding and serving God. So many have spoken on this issue, YouTube, and each I'm saying I am speaking on this issue, each individual has a unique perspective. I'm going to conclude that ultimately to believe or not in the existence of God is a matter of inclination or preference, but it doesn't mean it has to be whimsical. There should be informed choices. The existence of God or not doesn't depend on opinions. However much I yell and scream God exists, or however much anyone yells and screams that God doesn't exist, He exists or He doesn't exist. It's not dependent on what anyone thinks. Even if we think that all the arguments for God's existence are all useless, it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. Or if we think that all the arguments opposing the existence of God are useless, it doesn't prove that atheism is false. I was saying I wanted to bring some new perspectives. Well, mine, why am I speaking on this? Mine is a new perspective in terms of contemporary discussions because it is a Vedic, Vaishnava, Hare Krishna perspective, and debates on these issues are mostly between atheists and anti-theists and agnostics on one side, skeptics versus Christians, especially Protestants. After the great age of the anti-theists, new atheism, Jordan Peterson came to prominence as a public intellectual, and he's a Roman Catholic. So my new perspective is the Hare Krishna perspective. It's not new because such discussions have been going on, does God exist or not, deep into the past, long before Christ and Christianity. I'm a Hare Krishna. Okay, that's not mainstream or respectable. And I'm aware that many will, at the outset, dismiss me as a fit candidate to speak on these issues. But actually, this Krishna consciousness comes in a theistic tradition that far outdates Christianity and has a highly developed theology, philosophy, epistemology, and system of apologetics. Admittedly, I may not be the best member of this Krishna consciousness movement to publicly tackle these topics which are being discussed by intellectuals with deep knowledge of various fields of science and technology, and I don't even have a university degree, which immediately throws me in the garbage pit in the eyes of those who do have university degrees. However, no one else so far from our camp has attempted to publicly and in some detail address these important issues. So I'm making a tentative attempt, at least for the edification of the members of this movement, the Vaishnava world, who no doubt, members of the Krishna consciousness movement, often have to face questions and objections that arise from the public discussions of these topics, atheism, does God exist, and so on. And some of the members of this movement, some of the children I know who are not children now, who were born as children of some of our devotees, some of them are swayed or influenced by propaganda by vocal atheists such as Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, Christopher Hitchens, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the propaganda that in the name of science we can assure you there is no trace of God in anything we observe. Hawking said, before we understand science, in other words, before there was an understanding of science, it is natural to believe that God created the universe, but now science offers a more convincing explanation. I'm an atheist. That's what he said, and he's lauded as the greatest scientist of recent times. Whew. Sounds pretty convincing. What do they say? More or less, the atheists say that God is just a belief, an imagination, but the world is real, this world is real. Get real and focus on this world. Don't waste your time and mislead others with fantasies. God did not create man, man created God. That's what they say. It sounds pretty damning, but it's just an assertion. Non-provable. We'll discuss all these things. So why am I undertaking this series of talks? Yeah, it's to combat the deeply entrenched scientific view of randomness and therefore meaninglessness in all things. Also, to let it be more widely known that we, the Hare Krishna people, are theists and philosophers, and to communicate to seekers that there is a strong, rigid, robust, theistic alternative beyond Abrahamism. My revered spiritual master, His Divine Grace Śrīla A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupāda, wrote in the preface to his edition of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the ancient theistic science, which he translated into English, he wrote, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the transcendental science not only for knowing the ultimate source of everything, but also for knowing our relation with Him and our duty toward perfection of the human society on the basis of this perfect knowledge. It is powerful reading matter in the Sanskrit language, and it is now rendered into English elaborately so that simply by a careful reading one will know God perfectly well. So much so that the reader will be sufficiently educated to defend himself from the onslaught of atheists. Over and above this, the reader will be able to convert others to accepting God as a concrete principle. Now, That's the end of that quote. Now, it is practically considered a necessity in the God versus no God polemic to have a background in science, which I don't have. But we see that my revered spiritual master is saying here that just by understanding Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, one can become perfectly theistic and present knowledge of God even to atheists. Maybe science is overrated. I'll get back to all these things later. My basic approach is simple, but when researching to flesh out these arguments, I found a huge amount of material on this subject, related subjects on the internet. So the issue is important, definitely not resolved. The very fact that we know the position of Einstein, Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, Werner Heisenberg, and other recent eminent scientists regarding God indicates what a big issue it is. They're all scientists. Why are they talking about God? Theology is not their field, but they felt it important to mention it. The fact that Dawkins, Sam Harris, and others are on a campaign to defeat theism shows that it's a big issue. We from the Hare Krishna side should also address this. Sam Harris wrote an essay, "Science Must Destroy Religion." In the course of these talks, I'll mention, discuss, in some way, not in great detail, evolutionary theory, quantum theory, string theory, Big Bang theory, cosmological theories, psychological theories, and other fields, which I'm anything but an expert in. But these topics must arise in a contemporary discussion of theism versus atheism. I've not studied these things very deeply. In this discussion, topics such as quantum theory, evolution, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences are often cited. But how many people actually have deep knowledge of these? And even if someone has deep knowledge in one field, they're unlikely to have it in another. Just like, for instance, Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, he's not an expert in quantum theory. It can be also that even experts within the same field can be deeply divided, and experts in these fields, some of them believe in God, some of them don't. It's not possible to become expert in all these fields. All of this suggests that the topic of the existence or not of God is too vast to get a full grip on simply by applying our own intelligence and trying to understand everything. It's not required to become an expert in all these fields before one can even begin to discuss these topics. Otherwise, no one would discuss them. I must say that Stephen Meyer has applied his considerable intelligence to get to grips with several important fields of science related to the God question. He's pretty exceptional in that regard. But in general, if I can say I know, say 0.01% about quantum theory, then maybe Richard Dawkins, Jordan Peterson, maybe they know 0.1% or 1%. So I know very, very little. Probably more than the average person in the street, because I have done some reading in it. But then even big proponents of atheism or theism, they may also know very little. I used to watch debates on YouTube up to about 2010 on these topics, when Dawkins and Hitchens were at their height. But I stopped watching them because all too often the issue discussed was whether or not religion is a good force in the world, which is only tangential to the question of the existence of God. By the way, two atheists, Stalin and Mao Zedong, killed more people in about 50 years than all the religious wars in the history of the last 1,000 years. Here's a statement from Freeman Dyson, professor of physics at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University, one of the 20th century's most respected physicists. He stated, "Religion has been historically and still is today a cause of great evil as well as great good in human affairs. We have seen terrible wars and terrible persecutions conducted in the name of religion. We have also seen large numbers of people inspired by religion to live lives of heroic virtue, bringing education and medical care to the poor, helping to abolish slavery and spread peace among nations." Compared to the tenor of those tussles or attacks by the anti-theists, nowadays some top atheists seem to be more respectful than previously, which suggests a subtle acknowledgement of the pushback by some highly educated and lucid theists, which has made the anti-theists or atheists really realize that their position is not as unassailable as they thought. One prominent or highly educated atheist, Peter Boghossian, was once anti-religious. He's still an atheist, but now he sees Christians as allies in countering ideological orthodoxies and threats to academic freedom. Politics makes strange bedfellows. Recently, I saw some recorded discussions between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, which were respectful, mutually respectful, very intellectual, but just as inconclusive. Neither budged an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch. I couldn't be so intellectual. But in one sense we could say, well, what is the use of such debates? Because the nature of reality, whether or not God exists, is not affected by opinions. Of course, debates can sway opinions, and that's one reason why big intellectuals, both atheists and theists, are out there giving their spiel, and why I am also. But often the most convinced-sounding, intellectually astute, well-dressed, clear-voiced, good-looking speakers make the strongest impression. One reason why Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and others gained traction is because they are well-informed, they've taken the trouble to do deep research into their topics, lucid, convinced, and also because they're not ugly. It's true from the theistic side also. It's a matter of psychology that we tend to trust people who sound convinced, sound like they know what they're talking about, are at least reasonably good looking, but it's all irrelevant to the question of the existence or not of God. Often the debates seem to go nowhere because there are no fixed rules, there are different basic assumptions, no clear frame of reference, unlike a law court. But even then, the judge or jury have to decide, and sometimes a decision is referred to a higher court, or a decision made is overturned sometimes decades later. Judges can be wrong. Should then these questions not be considered or simply left to individual belief? They should be thought about. But these questions aren't new. Highly intelligent people have been discussing these questions for centuries. Whatever the latest discoveries may be, which generally the atheists, they say atheism is bolstered by science, but religion isn't going away. And again, Stephen Meyer is using science to make a robust case for the existence of an intelligent designer of the universe. Peter Berger, director of the Institute of Culture, Religion, and World Affairs at Boston University, stated, "Religion is not about to disappear. The belief is still quite prevalent among intellectuals, secular intellectuals, that religion is a kind of backwards phenomenon that with rising education will increasingly disappear. That's not happening. It's not going to happen. Religion is with us. The arguments will continue on and on." Again, I'm going to talk about Stephen Meyer because, I'm impressed. I have to admit, I'm impressed by him, and he is making a difference in this whole discussion. He's a best-selling author. He's not a lightweight intellectually. He's a PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University, a former geophysicist. He's completely comfortable with Big Bang theory and biological evolution theory, which I'm not. His case is to demonstrate that these could not have happened without intelligent intervention. There's nothing new intrinsically in what he's presenting, but he brings together important strands of scientific research that point to theism, and he presents them with exceptional clarity, so that it is hard to deny their validity. He has deep knowledge of the various fields of science relevant to his subject, which is the origin or otherwise of the universe, incisive philosophical insight to evaluate various claims. He doesn't avoid Bayesian logic, rather, he's adept in it. And he is gentlemanly in analyzing others' claims and arguing his own. And he has the grit to continue in the face of sometimes bigoted and nasty opposition. Again, I'm giving a new perspective. Why is it new? It's new in the sense, and I don't think any of the major proponents of theism or atheism have emphasized this as much as I'm going to emphasize it, that psychological factors are major in what we believe in. Another way in which my presentation is different, is very different, is because I say that the God question is not what we should be discussing, at least not in the beginning. We need to start at the beginning. For the sake of argument, just giving an analogy, for the sake of argument, if we take calculus as the highest point of mathematics, or anyway, it's a high level of mathematics for school children. They start with simple arithmetic. If we want to teach calculus, we can't teach it to 5-year-old kids. You can teach them arithmetic, algebra, and gradually you go up. So in the same way, to extrapolate from this, if we take the concept of God as complex, it's a high level of spirituality, then we should start with understanding spirituality, ABC. We're talking about God. God means spiritual. What do we mean by spiritual? Without understanding this, discussion of God is superfluous. Bhagavad-gītā, prominent Vedic text, first discusses the existence of the soul, the nature of the individual soul, who you am and I am, who every living being is. Only gradually does Bhagavad-gītā come to discuss the nature of God and our relationship with Him. So at all, if we're going to discuss God, first we have to understand spirituality. And from the Bhagavad-gītā perspective, the whole idea of understanding the existence or not of God through science is flawed, because science can only go as far as our sensory and intellectual ability goes, and especially science as it's practiced today is committedly physicalist, materialist, naturalist. That means we only believe in what we can observe, matter. It a priori rejects anything spiritual, or it rejects vitalism, the idea that there is vital spirit which enlivens matter. Dr. Meyer calls this scientific materialism, philosophical term. But the idea that we can understand everything about this world, or what we can understand about this world through our sensory and intellectual apparatus, is in itself irrational. We're so small and limited. We live for a very small time. We're in an infinitesimal part of the universe. Our ability to see is very limited. Our ability to rationalize is very limited. And why should we think, just because our experiences of this world, looking out from this world, why should we just a priori reject that there are other planes of existence, such as spiritual reality? Now, many scientists, it's quite acceptable, now are dabbling with the idea that there may be other forms of life or other paradigms of life, but they all want to keep it within the materialistic box. But why can't there be spiritual reality? Scientists say we have discovered many things that were previously unknown and unimagined. Sound waves, subatomic particles, infrared light. they had to change their way of thinking in order to accommodate these discoveries. We say, change your way of thinking to discover spiritual reality. Can there be any meeting between the physicalist and the spiritual approach? Rupert Sheldrake, who's another Cambridge scientist who I've drawn from a lot in this series of talks. Cambridge scientist, but now discredited because he thinks outside the box. He says that science should stop being dogmatic. Open your horizons. Some years ago, when atheism was a hot topic, I saw a BBC talk show about atheism and theism, in which there was quite a large audience, maybe 50, 60 people present, and they passed around the mic, and each had about 20 seconds to speak. They had to give quick one-liners. Ridiculous! How can you thrash out such deep philosophical topics with some blah, 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 some one-liners, quasi-intellectual entertainment? This series of talks will be a little long, but I hope to get into the issues and to express some perspectives which might be new even to seasoned debaters. It's meant for serious people. It's not meant for intellectual masturbation. I'll get trolled by atheists even without listening. Maybe trolled also by Christian Muslims, maybe by some atheistic Hindus. You can be a Hindu and an atheist, by the way. Don't recommend it, but it's not outside the extremely broad scope of Hinduism. But all this trolling, it proves little else except the unintelligent mentality and nasty mentality of the troller. I have reasons for saying why I'm not an atheist. Among the many sources I have consulted in preparing these talks, some are, I'm going to list some books, The God Delusion by Dr. Richard Dawkins. Yes, I read it all. I already mentioned Return of the God Hypothesis by Dr. Stephen Meyer. The Science Delusion by Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, Dr. Keith Ward, Doubting Dawkins, Jayadvaita Swami, Vanity Karma, Pierre St. Clair, Cosmology on Trial, another professor, Cambridge professor, Alistair McGrath, Dawkins' God, Kitty Ferguson, The Fire in the Equations, then Henk J. Keilman, Intelligence or Chaos, The Atheist Delusion, a book called Krishna in Syllogisms by Gauranga Premananda Das and Avadhuta Rayadas, and Mechanical and Non-Mechanical Science by Dr. Richard Thompson. I don't necessarily uphold or accept everything stated by all these authors. I do admire the theists who I've consulted, their lucidity in presenting non-politically correct perspectives. And of course, my main source is my lifelong theological grounding in the teachings of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, which present in contemporary format the theistic teachings of the ancient Vedic tradition. So in summary, without having exhaustively studied all the issues in the atheism versus theism debate. I'm presenting some collated perspectives and thoughts that I've gathered. I pray that in doing so I will give some pleasure to my eternal spiritual master and eternal well-wisher, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Śrīla Prabhupāda. His satisfaction is the goal of my life, for if he is satisfied, then Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is satisfied. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patita